Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey, Herman and Corn. So we talked about the Rampocalypse, that the price of RAM has risen by 400%. It's crazy, an almost unprecedented rise. The ramification, get it, is being felt by both consumers and by OEMs. This has a lot of people scratching their heads when you see something like this. There's no way around it. If you're counting on doing a major RAM upgrade, it's now going to cost a lot more, and the price may not come down. This brings me to ask about a strategy for purchasing hardware that I've seen recommended widely, but I've never actually done it, or I don't know anyone who's done this, but it would be interesting to know. So that is buying hardware from data centers. We commonly hear that data centers are good places to score deals on hardware, particularly in the current situation where you're seeing that these unpredictable price fluctuations is actually driven by data centers because they go through stuff really quickly. And we've talked in previous episodes about sustainable technology and this desire to use and reuse and upcycle parts where possible. So it actually fits nicely, I think, with a sustainability agenda to hardware, that if data centers are, upgrading between memory types at a prodigious pace and causing these crazy fluctuations in consumer pricing, that, it seems like it's pretty fair that we should take their old stuff. So Herman and Corn, I'm really curious. In Israel, we mostly buy computer parts from KSP and Ivory, and in the US, Newegg and Amazon. So actually a pretty similar situation. We have a couple of major retail outlets here that also sell online. I've never actually heard of someone, except on Reddit, where sometimes you see these posts on like the data hoarder subreddit, where some enterprising individual shows up to a data center and ends up with a stack full of old hard drives that no one needs anymore. So you do see these kind of entertaining stories like these, but it actually does strike me as a good idea, particularly as I'm always interested in the more kind of enterprise or industrial grade hardware, stuff like hardware RAID controllers, the ultra fast data links that are either challenging to find through direct to consumer purchasing channels, or stuff that is just astronomically expensive. But sometimes when data centers upgrade their gear so quickly, it seems like a sensible purchasing channel, if albeit secondhand. So Herman and Corn, how does one actually do this? How would I find if I were to try poke around my neighborhood for friendly data center techs? Can you just literally call them up and ask if they're interested in selling any of their legacy hardware? How does it work in practice? What are some tips? Over to you two.
So, the Rampocalypse is real, Herman. I was looking at prices for some DDR5 sticks this morning, and I genuinely thought there was a glitch on the website. I almost fell out of my chair.
It is not a glitch, Corn. It is a full-blown economic phenomenon. I am Herman Poppleberry, and I have been tracking the spot prices for DRAM all week. We are seeing a 400% increase in some sectors. It is the perfect storm of manufacturing shifts, high demand for artificial intelligence training servers, and some legacy supply chain hiccups that just will not go away. By February 2026, the industry has pivoted so hard toward high bandwidth memory for AI clusters that standard consumer DDR5 has become an afterthought for the big fabs.
It is brutal, and that is exactly what our housemate Daniel was asking about in the audio prompt he sent us. He's looking for a way around these insane retail prices, specifically by tapping into the secondary market for data center hardware. It is a fascinating idea. Reusing enterprise-grade gear instead of fighting for the scraps at consumer retail.
Daniel is onto something significant here. The hardware lifecycle in a professional data center is fundamentally different from how we treat our home computers. When you or I buy a laptop, we usually keep it until it literally stops working or becomes too slow for basic tasks. But in the enterprise world, hardware is often treated as a depreciating asset with a very strict expiration date, regardless of whether it is still functioning perfectly.
Right, and that creates this massive surplus. But before we get into the how-to, I want to dig into the why. If this hardware is so great, why are these massive companies getting rid of it? Is it actually legacy, or is there something else going on? Because if I am Daniel, I am wondering if I am just buying someone else's junk.
That is a common misconception. It is rarely junk. The primary driver for data center refreshes is actually the performance per watt ratio. If you are running 10,000 servers, a 10% increase in power efficiency translates to millions of dollars in savings on electricity and cooling over the course of a year. So, when a new generation of processors, like the latest Xeon Scalable or EPYC chips, comes out that can do more work with less power, the old ones become a liability on the balance sheet, even if they are still incredibly powerful.
So, it is an efficiency play. They are not dumping it because it is broken. They are dumping it because the electricity bill for keeping it is higher than the cost of buying new, more efficient gear. That makes sense for a giant corporation. But for a guy like Daniel living in a house in Jerusalem, the math is different. He is not running 10,000 servers. He is running 1 or 2. The power draw of an older Xeon processor might cost him an extra few shekels a month, but he is saving thousands on the initial purchase.
Exactly. And there is also the warranty factor. Most enterprise hardware is purchased with a 3 or 5 year support contract. Once that contract expires, the risk of a single hour of downtime outweighs the cost of a hardware refresh. For a bank or a massive cloud provider, they cannot afford to have a technician hunting for spare parts for a 7-year-old server. They want everything standardized and under warranty. This means that perfectly functional, high-end gear hits the secondary market in massive waves every few years.
Okay, so the gear is good. Now let's talk about the logistics. Daniel asked if he could just call up a local data center and ask to buy their old stuff. I am picturing him knocking on the door of a big nondescript building here in Har Hotzvim and asking for a bag of RAM. That feels unlikely to work.
It is highly unlikely to work, Corn. In fact, it might get you a very stern talking to from a security guard. Data centers are incredibly sensitive environments. They have strict protocols for data destruction and asset disposal. They generally do not deal with individuals. They work with what are called ITAD companies, which stands for Information Technology Asset Disposition.
ITAD. Okay, so these are the middlemen.
Precisely. These companies specialize in going into a data center, professionally deinstalling the racks, and most importantly, securely wiping or physically destroying the hard drives to ensure no data leaks out. Once the data is cleared and the hardware is audited, the ITAD companies sell the equipment in bulk to liquidators or directly to consumers through specialized channels.
So, if Daniel wants to get his hands on this stuff, he needs to find where these liquidators hang out. Where is the digital equivalent of that bag of RAM he is looking for?
The most accessible place for most people is actually eBay. There is a massive community of enterprise resellers there. You can find stores that specialize in nothing but refurbished servers, networking gear, and enterprise storage. But you have to know what you are looking for. You are not searching for gaming brands. You are searching for terms like Dell PowerEdge, HP ProLiant, or Lenovo ThinkSystem. For Daniel, I would recommend looking at the Dell R740 or R750 series. They are the current sweet spot for value.
And what about the specific parts Daniel mentioned? He was talking about RAID controllers and ultra-fast data links. Those are not exactly things you find at the local electronics shop.
No, they are not. But on the secondary market, they are surprisingly affordable. Take a RAID controller, for example. An enterprise-grade LSI or Broadcom SAS controller that cost $800 new 5 years ago might be sitting on eBay for $40 today, and these things are built like tanks. They are designed to run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for a decade.
Wait, $40? That is a massive price drop. Is there a catch? I mean, does an enterprise RAID controller even work in a normal desktop computer?
That is where the technical nuance comes in. Most of these cards use a standard PCI Express interface, so they will physically fit into a modern motherboard. However, you often have to deal with things like firmware. Many of these cards come with IR firmware, which stands for Integrated RAID. This is great if you want the card to manage your disks. But many home lab enthusiasts prefer IT mode, or initiator target mode, which essentially turns the card into a simple pass-through so the operating system can see the individual drives directly. This is crucial for modern file systems like ZFS.
I have heard you talk about flashing firmware before. It sounds like the kind of thing that could brick a device if you're not careful. Is that something a regular user can handle?
It is definitely a more advanced task, but the documentation in the community is incredible. There are legendary forum posts and guides that walk you through every step. It is part of the fun of this hobby. You are taking high-end industrial equipment and bending it to your will. If Daniel wants to avoid the hassle, he can even search for pre-flashed IT mode cards on eBay. Resellers know there is a market for this and will do the work for you for an extra $10.
What about the networking side? Daniel mentioned ultra-fast data links. I assume he is talking about 10 gigabit or even 40 gigabit networking. Most of us are still stuck on 1 gigabit at home.
This is where the data center surplus market really shines. In the consumer world, 10 gigabit networking is still treated as a premium, expensive feature. But in the data center, 10 gigabit has been the baseline for over a decade. They have moved on to 25, 40, 100, and even 400 gigabit links. This means 10 gigabit SFP Plus cards are being pulled out of servers by the thousands. You can often get a dual port 10 gigabit network card for less than the price of a nice lunch.
SFP Plus. That is the one with the little pluggable modules and fiber optic cables, right?
Exactly. And that is another great tip for Daniel. Instead of buying expensive fiber optic transceivers and cables, he can look for DAC cables, which stands for Direct Attach Copper. These are short copper cables with the SFP modules already attached to both ends. They are perfect for connecting a server to a switch in the same room. They are cheap, reliable, and they do not require any fragile fiber optics.
Okay, so we have the hardware, we have the source, and we have the interface. But I want to talk about the downsides, because if this was all sunshine and rainbows, everyone would be doing it. What are the gotchas when you bring a piece of a data center into your living room?
Oh, there are several, and they are not insignificant. The first one is noise. Data centers are loud. They use high-pressure fans to move a massive amount of air through cramped server chassis. Those fans are often 40mm or 60mm units that spin at 15,000 RPM. They sound like a miniature jet engine taking off. If Daniel puts a standard enterprise server in his bedroom, he is not going to get any sleep.
I remember when you bought that old rack mount switch a couple of years ago. You turned it on in the kitchen, and we could hear it from the balcony. It was a high-pitched whine that just drilled into your brain.
Exactly. I eventually had to perform a fan mod, replacing the industrial fans with quieter consumer ones. But you have to be careful, because those quiet fans move much less air. You can also use IPMI commands. That is the Intelligent Platform Management Interface to manually override the fan curves, but you have to monitor the temperatures closely to make sure you are not overheating the components.
And then there is the power consumption. We touched on this earlier, but it is worth expanding on. Older enterprise gear can be very thirsty.
It really can. A dual-socket server from 2 generations ago might idle at over 100 watts. If you leave that on 24 hours a day, that is nearly 2.5 kilowatt hours per day. Depending on your electricity rates, that can add up to a significant amount over a year. You might save $500 on the purchase price, but spend an extra $200 a year on electricity. You have to do the math to see if it actually makes sense for your specific use case.
So, it is a balance. You are trading your time, some extra electricity, and potentially some noise for massive performance and high-end features at a fraction of the retail cost.
Precisely. And there is also the physical size. Most enterprise gear is designed for 19-inch racks. It is long and flat, often 30 inches deep. It does not fit well on a standard bookshelf or under a desk. You often end up needing a small server rack, which is another expense and takes up more space.
Let's talk about the sustainability aspect for a second. Daniel mentioned this fits into a sustainability agenda. How much of an impact does this actually make? Because e-waste is a massive global problem.
It is a huge impact. The most sustainable piece of technology is the one that has already been manufactured. When we buy new, we are accounting for the carbon footprint of mining. The raw materials, the energy used in the fabrication of the silicon, the assembly, and the global shipping. By extending the life of enterprise hardware by another 5 or 10 years, we are significantly reducing the total environmental cost of that device. It is the ultimate form of upcycling.
It feels like a win-win in that regard. You get professional-grade hardware, and you are keeping it out of a landfill. But I am curious about the Rampocalypse specifically. If RAM prices are up 400% for consumers, are they also up for this used enterprise gear? Or is that market more stable?
That is a great question. The enterprise market is definitely affected by global supply and demand, but it operates on a different lag. When a big company like Amazon or Microsoft does a massive upgrade, they might dump 50,000 sticks of DDR4 or early DDR5 RAM onto the market all at once. That can cause a temporary price crash in the secondary market, even if new retail prices are skyrocketing. So, if you are patient and you keep an eye on the listings, you can find incredible deals that completely ignore the retail trends.
So, timing is everything. You have to be a bit of a bargain hunter.
You do, and you have to be willing to do some research. For example, you need to know the difference between UDIMM, RDIMM, and LRDIMM RAM. Most consumer motherboards only support UDIMM, which is unbuffered. Most enterprise servers require RDIMM, which is registered. They are not interchangeable. If Daniel buys a bunch of cheap enterprise RAM for a standard gaming motherboard, it simply will not work.
See, that is the kind of detail that would trip up a lot of people. You think you are getting a deal, and then you realize you bought something that is physically compatible but electrically different.
Exactly. But if you buy an enterprise server to put that RAM into, then you are in business. Suddenly, you have a machine that can support 512 gigabytes or even a terabyte of RAM, which would be prohibitively expensive or even impossible on a consumer platform.
A terabyte of RAM? I cannot even imagine what I would do with that much memory. I could probably open 3 tabs in Chrome with that.
Very funny. But for things like virtualization, running dozens of Docker containers, or managing massive databases, that memory is a godsend. It opens up a whole new world of what you can do with a home server.
Okay, let's get practical. If Daniel is listening and he is ready to start his journey into the world of data center surplus, what are the first 3 things he should do?
First, he should identify his goal. Is he trying to build a high-speed storage server, a virtualization lab, or just a powerful workstation? That will dictate what kind of hardware he needs. Second, he should head over to the Serve the Home website and forums. It is the gold standard for this kind of information. They have a section called Great Deals where community members post the best enterprise surplus finds from across the web. I would also check out LabGopher, which is a specialized search engine specifically for used enterprise servers on eBay.
Serve the Home and LabGopher. I have seen those sites. They go deep on the technical specs.
They really do. And third, he should look for a reputable eBay seller that offers a warranty. Even a 30-day or 90-day warranty on used gear provides a lot of peace of mind. You want to make sure the hardware has been tested and that the seller will stand behind it if it arrives dead on arrival.
What about local options? We are here in Israel. Is there a local version of this surplus market, or are we mostly looking at international shipping?
There is a local market, but it is smaller. You can sometimes find great deals on ITAD too, which is our local secondhand marketplace. Look for people selling off old office equipment or small business servers. Sometimes you can find a hidden gem where someone just wants to clear out a storage room and doesn't realize the value of the networking cards or the RAM inside. But for the really high-end stuff, you are often looking at international shipping from the United States or Europe.
Shipping a heavy server across the ocean sounds expensive.
It can be. That is why many people focus on buying the smaller, high-value components like CPUs, RAM, and networking cards internationally, and then try to source the heavy chassis and power supplies locally. It is a bit of a puzzle, but that is part of the appeal.
It sounds like a real hobby. It is not just about saving money. It is about the thrill of the hunt and the satisfaction of building something professional grade on a shoestring budget.
It absolutely is. There is a deep satisfaction in seeing a 40 gigabit link light turn green on a piece of equipment that you rescued from being shredded. It feels like you're getting away with something. You have the same technology that powers the world's biggest companies right there in your home.
I think Daniel is going to love this. It definitely appeals to that tinkerer mindset. But I do want to circle back to the Ray controllers for a moment. He mentioned them specifically. Why would someone want a hardware RAID controller today when software RAID like ZFS or Unraid is so popular?
That is a great point, and it is a point of debate in the community. Traditionally, hardware RAID was necessary because CPUs were not powerful enough to handle the complex parity calculations required for RAID 5 or 6 without a dedicated processor on the controller card. Today, our CPUs are so fast that they can handle those calculations with a tiny fraction of their power.
So why bother with the card then?
There are still a few reasons. One is port density. A single RAID card, or an HBA, which is a host bus adapter, can often connect 8, 16, or even 24 drives using SAS expanders. Most motherboards only have 6 or 8 SATA ports. Another reason is the battery-backed cache. Many enterprise RAID cards have a small amount of high-speed memory and a battery or supercapacitor. This allows the card to safely cache writes, even if the power goes out. It can significantly improve performance for certain types of workloads.
But, as you mentioned, if you want to use ZFS, you actually want the card to stay out of the way.
Exactly. That is where IT mode comes in. You are using the card purely as a high-quality, high-density port multiplier. You get the professional-grade hardware and the reliable connections, but you let the software handle the data integrity. It is the best of both worlds.
It is amazing how much depth there is to this. We started with Daniel wanting to save some money on RAM, and we have ended up talking about SAS expanders and battery-backed caches. It really shows that the world of enterprise hardware is this vast, hidden ecosystem that most people never interact with.
It really is, and I think that's the real takeaway here. We are so used to the consumer cycle of buy new, use for 2 years, discard. But there is this parallel world where things are built to last, and where the economics are driven by different forces. Tapping into that world is not just a way to save money, it is a way to gain a deeper understanding of how the digital infrastructure of our world actually works.
I love that. It is a form of digital literacy, knowing how the sausage is made, so to speak.
Exactly. And speaking of literacy, I should mention one more thing for Daniel. If he is going to get into this, he should familiarize himself with the command line. A lot of enterprise gear is managed through a terminal, not a pretty graphical interface. It can be intimidating at first, but it is incredibly powerful once you get the hang of it.
Oh, I know Daniel is not afraid of the command line. He is the one who convinced us to switch our home router to that open source firmware last year.
That's right, he will be just fine then. In fact, he might enjoy the challenge of configuring a Cisco switch or an HP ILO management interface.
ILO. That is the Integrated Lights Out Management, right? The thing that lets you control the server even if it is turned off.
Yes, it is like having a tiny computer inside your server that is always running. You can remotely turn the server on or off, see the temperature sensors, and even access the virtual console as if you were sitting right in front of it with a monitor and keyboard. It is a game changer for managing hardware that might be tucked away in a closet or a basement.
See, that is another feature you almost never find on consumer boards, unless you are buying very high-end workstation gear. But it is standard on every enterprise server for the last 15 years.
Exactly. It makes you realize how much we are missing out on in the consumer space. We pay a premium for RGB lights and fancy heatsinks, while the enterprise world gets remote management and redundant power supplies for a fraction of the cost on the used market.
It really puts the Rampocalypse in perspective. While everyone else is fighting over the latest retail sticks, Daniel could be sitting on a pile of enterprise-grade memory and high-speed networking, all while being more sustainable.
It is a compelling vision, Corn, and I think it is one that more people should consider. Even if you are not a hardcore nerd, there is a lot to be said for buying high-quality refurbished gear instead of cheap, disposable consumer products.
I couldn't agree more. This has been a fascinating deep dive, Herman. I think we have given Daniel plenty to chew on.
I hope so. It's a big world out there, and there are some incredible deals to be found if you know where to look.
Well, if you have been enjoying our deep dives into the weird and wonderful world of technology, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app. It genuinely helps other people find the show and keeps us motivated to keep digging into these topics.
It really does. We love seeing those reviews pop up.
You can find all of our past episodes, including our recent one on the future of RISC-V architecture, at our website, myweirdprompts.com. We have an RSS feed there for subscribers, and a contact form if you want to send us a prompt like Daniel did.
We are also on Spotify, so you can follow us there to get notified whenever a new episode drops.
This has been My Weird Prompts. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the data center surplus market.
Until next time, keep exploring and don't be afraid to flash that firmware.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox Turbo.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.